Okay. Fantastic. Well, it's great. We've got teachers from all around the world. The hosts, we're in Spain. We've got Amy in South Africa today. So it's definitely a varied bunch of teachers we've got with us. So I'll tell everyone a bit about you, Amy. You work in Johannesburg for the British Council as an accounts relationship manager of exams.
Yeah, that's
So,
correct.
all right. So you're interested in adult education, and I can see that you've taught in some specialized courses like professional communication, intercultural communication, pragmatics of language, and well, really you're a diverse communication professional. We're really lucky to have you, Amy. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I am ready to hand over to you. You can share your slides, Amy, and I'll be here if you need me. Just say, hi, Melissa, can you help?
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great.
And thanks so much.
Have a good webinar.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Can I just confirm you can see my screen?
Yeah, I can see them. All looks great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of my colleagues. I've had a lot of support from them, from current and previous students, so thank you for that. And also thanks to Joe and Melissa for all of your support in the background. You've been really helpful, so thanks once again. I'd like to start off my presentation with a huge teacher appreciation. So I've written here, you deserve more than a medal, and let me tell you why. So I'm going to imagine now I'm standing in front of my multicultural class. I've got, I'd say about 20 students in it. They range in age between, say, 17 and 25. They're from all over the world. And these are some of the challenges that I face in my class. You're welcome to type in the chat or react if you can. Send me a little heart or a clap or a chat. I'd love to hear from you if any of these examples resonate with you. So I'm standing in front of my class, and these are the challenges I face. I have a schedule to follow and a certain number of units to complete by the end of the week. I also have a book that doesn't necessarily resonate with my students. It could perhaps be too Eurocentric. An example that I had was I was teaching a group of Angolan students. They were about 17 years old. And the reading that we did was about Princess Diana. And the book was set, I think it was in the 90s. So you can imagine that that kind of activity didn't work so well because it was hard for the students to engage with the material. I also have homework to check, which no one has done. I have a vocabulary test to set. I haven't even started that. I have a lesson plan to make. I've got a meeting tomorrow before class with my other teachers. And I have 15 essays to mark on the meaning of friendship. And it's for my elementary class, and they've got about, I'd say, 15 to 20 active words that they know. So that's going to be interesting. All of this is going on while I'm planning the next activity in my head. And perhaps the current one isn't going so well. You notice that some students aren't interacting well, or they're deviating from the task. And I'm keeping an eye on the student at the back because he's either cheating or he's flirting with the person next to him. I'm not quite sure. And surprise, all of this is happening and a brand new student walks into my class. I don't know his name. He's 3 weeks late to the course. He doesn't seem to have a book or a pen. And he also doesn't seem to speak any English. He looks a bit shocked, actually. And it's now my job as a teacher to interact with this student, get him involved in my class. I've been working really hard on the interaction patterns, on the classroom dynamics of my classroom, and I have to see how he can fit in. It's really, really difficult as a teacher, which is why I wanted to say thank you as a teacher as well. Because you're standing there confidently in front of your class every day. Whether you're teaching online, you've got back-to-back lessons, or you're in front of a classroom face-to-face, your students look to you for ambition, drive, direction. They look to you for wisdom, advice, perhaps solace as well. And you're also perhaps an entertainer too, even though the students often don't laugh at your jokes, especially if it's a beginner class. So that's just a little bit of background as to the challenges that you face as a teacher. And you might want to interact with your students on, say, a more personal, and you want to have better engagement levels with them, but it's not always possible. So by the end of this session, I would like to have looked at some different theories and communication models and why miscommunication happens. I think it's really important to understand why these miscommunication mishaps happen, because it will give you a greater understanding as to what's going on in your class. I'll also go through some examples of student and teacher errors in the classroom. This can be just general errors and also in particular multicultural classroom errors that happen regularly. I will also be going through some practical tools to help you, things that have really helped me when I was teaching, and this is in a lot of input from other colleagues that I have had along the way, and things that you can adapt to your needs as a teacher. There'll also be some further resources to help you along the way. This will be in the handout that you'll receive that Melissa has mentioned. I'd also love for this to be an interactive presentation. I know that I'm first up in today's lineup of events, so please, by all means, comment in the chat. Melissa's mentioned about the Q&A feature as well. I am able to see what you are typing as well, and I really look forward to engaging with you too. The first thing I'd like to look at is just a very brief summary of communication models. So the first one is the transmission model. So think about the reason why I've got this picture of a ball here. I'd like you to think of communication as a game. And my message is this ball. And the transmission model states that communication happens when I have my ball, I throw it at you, and I walk away because you've received my message. And that's the end of the communication. What the transmission model doesn't take into account the complexities of our own perceptual filters as people and how our family backgrounds, our age, our gender, all of these really affect how communication happens. And this is where the transactional model comes in. It explains that communication is a game of catch. So instead of having a ball, I now have a lump of clay. And each time I'm receiving or sending a message, I'm going to model it to my own perceptual filters. And as I've mentioned, it's your gender, your family background, your religion, even your own knowledge of the language. And then I'm going to throw it back to the next person, and they're going to model it based on how they see the world. It's also based on the relationship that you have with the other person. So this comes into effect, especially in a classroom, because the relationship that you have with the students, with fellow teachers, the relationship that the students have with each other, if they're friends or not, this affects the communication and the interaction patterns that happen. It's also really based on your unique understanding of the words that are being used. For example, the semantics and the connotations. You could have slang, and all of this affects if communication is effective in the classroom, and this is why miscommunication can happen. And the more people you add to the conversation, and in a classroom full of people, even if it's just one-to-one online, the complexity of communication grows exponentially. And this is what I'd like to focus on today and to show you what can go wrong. It's important to know that miscommunication, especially in a multicultural classroom, happens. You can't necessarily avoid it, but there are some fantastic ways and some fantastic tips I can show you to help resolve it quickly. So I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen very briefly. So my first question to you is, I want you to think of a typical day in your classroom. What are some common errors that students make? Let's see what you've got. Can be any error that a student will make in the classroom. Grammar, okay, that's a good one. Yeah, that you make errors with grammar, correct? English pronunciation, grammar, yes. Oh yeah, here we go. Lexis, vocabulary. Pronunciation, spelling. They're directly translating from one to another, absolutely. Register, yeah, fantastic. Wonderful, you've got it. Intonation, I like that. Use of their mother tongue, very good example. We'll get to that in a second. So my next question is, what are some errors that you can think of that you make as a teacher? Because we make errors too. So what are some common teacher errors that you can think of? Long teacher talking time. Yeah, I speak too much. Okay. Insufficient CCQs. Yes, fantastic. Okay, grammar. Okay, okay. Assuming they understand. Code switching. Fantastic. Neglect the students. Okay. Correcting errors immediately. Wonderful. Thank you. You guys have also such wonderful examples. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll look at some more examples. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just some that I know that I have definitely seen in my class. So we've answered, what are some common student errors that take place in your class? And what are some teacher errors that you can think of? So I'll start with the teacher errors. Perhaps we give poor instructions or unclear instructions. Perhaps our grammar explanations or vocabulary explanations are not clear. And this is a challenge because especially if you're teaching English in English, and that's a real challenge, and we have to be very clear on our explanations. And another one that I thought I would mention is giving one-to-one help too readily. So these examples I've got here, these are concept checking questions that you can use. I know it's really hard, and we always default to the, do you understand? Because a student will always say yes, but they don't understand. But they're never going to say that they don't, especially if you ask them directly. So some examples, once you've given your instructions, you could say, okay, you've got 3 tasks to do. What's the first one? What page should you be on? Because that's definitely happened. You give instructions, a few minutes later, you think you're doing a great job. And teacher, what page? So that happens a lot too. If you are teaching grammar, for example, the present continuous, you're saying, is this action complete or is it in progress? Are you doing this in a group or by yourself, just to make sure you've set the correct interaction patterns? And a nice one that I use regarding one-to-one help is you see a student struggling. So you see them, they're probably not doing the right thing. And it's so easy to just jump in and help them or just fix it. But rather ask, would you like to check with me beforehand? Sometimes they will, and sometimes they might say, no, I want to work with my partner, or I want to try, and then you can help me. So that's a nice tip to think of as well. In terms of student errors, we have misunderstanding, there's deviation from task. We also have incorrect use of target language. That's what we were talking about a lot when students, when teachers say students make problems with their grammar, for example. So I think a sentence that's ingrained into my head forever is, teacher, what means? It's really great to teach your students some classroom language. So if you hear, teacher, what means? What does this mean? And you put up the classroom language, for example, please explain again. Please repeat this. I don't understand the difference between this and this. If you have an online class, you could always type it in the chat or have a section where you've given them some additional classroom language to help as well. Another thing that I have done really successfully, especially around errors with the incorrect target language being used. So say they have a freer practice activity It's usually, say, a speaking activity. They're supposed to be using the present perfect, for example. I go around with my little book or a pen and a paper, and I write down some of the utterances that I hear, just short ones, for example. And I go around, I try not to engage with them too much. I just want to be listening. And I choose, say, 5 or even 10 sentences on the board. I make sure that at least, say, 1 or 2 or 3 of the sentences are correct, even if I make them up myself. And I tell the students the next activity, here are 10 of your sentences. I'd like you to find the 3 sentences that are correct. And I think the students always enjoy, because they might identify 1 or 2 of the sentences that they have said. It immediately makes the activity a little bit more engaging for the students because it's their own sentences. And that's a great way to try and get the communication going with your students and to help them with some error correction and some feedback for their incorrect grammar. Fantastic. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And I'd like to hear, I've heard a lot where you're from, but perhaps you could tell me which countries or nationalities of students have you taught? For example, I've had the privilege of meeting students from as far as Easter Island all the way to Thailand and everything in between. I've been really fortunate. So perhaps you could type in the chat, what are some of the nationalities, the students that you have taught? I'd love to hear from you. Iranian, Argentina, Nepalese. Fantastic, these are great examples. Turkish, wow. Brazil, Peru, Japan, Bangladesh. Only Pakistani students, okay. Madagascar, that's fantastic. I've heard a lot of Brazilians, especially in South Africa. We do have a lot of Brazilian students. Italy, Germany, Czech and Ukrainian, Ghana, that's a nice one. Moroccan, Polish, Mexican. Wow, it's really wonderful to see the impact that we have the students all across the world. It's really fantastic. Turkish, Taiwan, Argentina. That's wonderful. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Thank you so much for sharing. So we've looked at these errors. So now we have multicultural classroom errors. So on top of the errors that we've just looked at, which are really important and really common that happen every day, there are also lots of possibilities for miscommunication based on the multicultural students that you have in your class. As I've mentioned, conflict can arise, and I'll give you some examples that I have had in my classes. And I'm going to show you how to resolve them because you can't avoid it, but it is up to you as a teacher to have the tools to resolve them as quickly as possible. It also helps foster better rapport amongst your students. And that's one of the goals of most teachers. They want to have a great lesson. They want to have a great relationship with their students. So let's have a look at some of these examples. Here are some common multicultural missteps. I'm calling them missteps because it's often not intentional. Nobody sets out to offend someone. And in a multicultural space, even if the students are predominantly from one country or nationality in your class, these can still happen, these examples. So as a teacher, I was a young teacher. I was living in New Zealand at the time, and I was trying to keep things fresh. I had recently completed my CELTA. I was so excited to be teaching, and I would get my students to change their groups quite often. They wouldn't sit in the same place every day. Even in class, I would get them to change depending on the activity. And I wondered why my activities just didn't seem to be working. I had a large number of students from Saudi Arabia in my class. And this is not something that I had necessarily thought about, but I was grouping my students randomly. For example, 1, 2, 3, all the ones here, all the twos here, all the threes here. And I wasn't aware of it, but the communication just wasn't happening. The activities fell flat. They had great questions to talk about, but they weren't talking about them. So at break time once, I asked one of the female students, I said, please explain what's happening here. I don't really understand. And she said that because of where she comes from, it's not necessarily easy or possible to talk to, for example, another man who is not their husband, or that they feel comfortable talking to. So I was putting my students in a difficult situation, and I wasn't aware of it. So once she told me, and I was so grateful that she did, I just made sure to tactfully place the groups a little bit more thoughtfully, and the problem was resolved. Another example is political unawareness. Again, in New Zealand, I was teaching and I had a group of students. I had one of my surprise students who arrived late in the course. It was the first day she had been there. And I had some students talking to each other. And she was from Taiwan, and I put her with a student from China. And I wasn't aware of the cultural sensitivity around this, purely because I didn't know where she was from. So it takes a little bit of background knowledge and a little bit of patience and understanding and getting to know your students as soon as you can, because these kind of situations, you can resolve them quickly if you know exactly what's happening. And another one is lack of control in the classroom. Again, I've got another example of this happened to me. I was teaching in South Africa. I had a large group. The majority of my students, say 80% of them, were from Turkey. And I was really struggling to gain control in the classroom. They would often speak their native language in the class. It was seen as disrespectful to other students. The students didn't get on well. And I had a bit of an intervention with them. And I did one of these activities that I'm going to show you. I wish I had done it at the beginning of the course, because I think it would have been more effective. But I had to do it in the middle of the course to try and resolve what was happening in the class. Some other examples of student multicultural missteps. This could be conflict. It's related to their age, their gender, their religion, their political views, perhaps even their family background. There can be apparent insensitivity. This can be due to a lack of language or a lack of vocab. It links back to the transactional model that we spoke about earlier, and how our understanding and our communication with someone is really based on our knowledge of the actual words being used. It can also be a lack of experience with cultures outside their own, and I'll focus on that in a minute. So here are some tips on how to resolve these missteps in the classroom. Something that I have used really effectively is a needs analysis. So I would have, it sounds very fancy, but it's really not. You have a document, they can put it in online, you can give it to them for homework as they start your class. Perhaps on the second day would be a good day to do this. And you ask them questions like, why are you studying English? What kind of activities do you like? What do you like to do in your free time? It's a multifaceted activity, because the first thing that it's great for is you get to know your students' writing ability very quickly. You get a little sample of it, and it lets you understand a little bit more about your students, especially if they're shy or they don't have the language to communicate with you early on. Having sufficient knowledge of your students and their culture, you don't have to be an expert in every single culture and country that you meet, but just having that awareness, I think, is really important as well. You need to be able to adapt quickly. So if you see a situation, as a teacher, you're great at reading body language. You can see if someone doesn't understand or if someone is uncomfortable. You can change the activity, you can stop it, you can pivot it. It's up to you. You should have that control in the class to be able to do that if you need to. And another one, which is great, I did this with my very difficult Turkish class. I gave them the opportunity to do a presentation based on something that they were proud about in their culture, for example. And to listen to the students speak, they would often say, give a brief history lesson of where they're from, or a particular food that's really common in their country, and listening to them speak and educate the rest of the class. It was really interesting. Plus, it let them feel like they were being heard as well. In terms of students, much like us for this presentation, having a code of conduct or a policy to avoid religion and political views in the classroom is a great place to start. I think that it fosters an idea of it being a safe space, and particular students feel like they won't be targeted as well. That's really important. Encourage students to be sensitive and open-minded. And you want to remind them that learning English is not their only goal, especially if they have traveled to your country or they are having lessons with you online and you're not in the same country or from the same place. You want to remind them that you're learning about other countries and other cultures and other people. Learning English is not your only goal, and that's why you're here. Another great one is to set up a list of rules together. So say on the first or second day of class, you draw up a list of rules and you work together as a class. For example, only speaking English in the classroom. No cheating during tests. You could also say no interrupting another student. The list that you work together, you condense. You take a picture of it or put it up. If you've got, say, a poster, put it up in your class. And if you feel like things are getting a little bit out of hand, or you feel like you need to redirect your students' attention, you hold them accountable to the list of rules that you set up together. So all of this being said, I'd like to show you 3 practical tools to encourage this kind of meaningful engagement. You want to have respect in your classroom, mutual respect for yourself, for the students, for fellow students, for students to have respect for their teacher. And you'd like to have a greater fulfillment. You don't want to finish a class, or you don't want to finish a course and say, oh, that didn't go so well. I remember somebody told me you're only as good as your last lesson. It sometimes feels like that when you're a teacher, because you've got a lot on your plate, as I've mentioned in the beginning, and you want the course to be successful. You want to build a fantastic rapport with your students and a sense of trust as well. So these are my top 3 tips. I will go through each of them one by one, and we'll also have a little bit of interaction to see if any of these would work in your classroom. The first one is contributions and expectations. And I can't thank my colleague Danielle, who showed me this, so full credit to her. It changed my life really as a teacher, because she did it for us during a professional development session. And I ended up adapting it to my classes, and I noticed a huge change. And this is what I did as an intervention during that really difficult class of Turkish students that I had. And it really made a big difference. I'll then look at a little activity that you can do at any time during the course, perhaps when you feel like things aren't going so well, perhaps when you'd like a little bit of feedback from your students. And it's also nice for them to have a feeling of they're giving some feedback and you're taking it on board. And the last one is active listening. This is much easier for higher levels, and it is something that I have put in the handout for you to have a look at, but I'll show you some basic steps of how you can implement it in your classes. So the first one, imagine this is my whiteboard in the class. If you are doing it online, you can still do it something like this. This is a great thing to do on the first, maybe the second day. I know it's harder if you have rolling intakes, because then you have almost a brand new class every Monday perhaps, or you get new students that arrive. But there is definitely a way that you can adapt this to make it work in your class. So this is my whiteboard. Say expectations, perhaps the students don't know what that word means. You can scaffold it a bit for them. You could say, by the end of this course, I want to achieve, I expect that. And then the easiest way to do it is with little post-its, or perhaps you cut up little pieces of different colored paper, and they need to write what they expect, what they want to achieve by the end of the course. So I've written some examples. I want to speak more fluently. Just move this over here. Teacher, my grammar is better. My listening has improved and I can follow conversations more easily. I get this a lot, especially with students that are a little bit older. They want to improve their job prospects. So that's why they're learning English. It's also really imperative to have your own expectation as a teacher. So I think it's important that the students can see what you want and what you are going to contribute to the class. So I used to say very often, I want my students to have more confidence to speak and enjoy using English. So it's very easy to write what you expect from the class or from the course. So you could do, say, even if they have 3 expectations, that's fine. The hard part comes now with the contributions. So in order to achieve this, I commit to, I promise to work on, or I will contribute, I will give. It's really important that the students understand that the teacher is not a magician. We can't stand in front, wave a magic wand, and all of a sudden you're fluent in English or a language. So given these examples, perhaps the student says, for example, this one, who wants to speak more fluently, they say, I will speak only English in class. Okay, that's a good start. Perhaps they'll say, I promise to do my homework. Also good. The student who wanted to improve their listening, they would say perhaps, I promise to listen to movies and podcasts and songs and activities that my teacher suggests. And the student who wanted to improve their job prospects, you could have, say, for example, I give my teacher additional writing activities to check, and I'll work on the business English activities that we do in class. That's a great one. And you as a teacher, I promise to encourage my students on a daily basis, find fun and engaging activities and explain clearly. So where the activity, I think, really comes in and is really beneficial is where you can flesh out the contributions. So you delve in a little bit more. You say, I will speak only English in class. And you ask things like why? And how do you think this will help you? It can turn into a really interesting lesson and conversation. At the end of it, when you're happy with the contributions and expectations, you can condense it. You could perhaps type it out or print it, take a photo, and transfer it to somewhere that's really visible in the class. Again, you're holding the students accountable to the contributions that they are going to make. And I think it also helps when students, if they try to complain, they feel like you're not doing enough as a teacher, it's much easier for you to say, well, have you done all of your homework? Are you listening to all of the movies and podcasts and song activities that I'm recommending to you? It's a really great way to build transparency and then also more trust in the class too. So in the chat, have you ever done an activity like this with your students? Is this something you think would work in your class? I'd love to hear from you. I'll stop sharing my screen again. Oh, you're welcome. I'm not finished yet. I'm not done. That's only the first one. So do you think this activity would work? Have you done anything like this in your classes before? 100% definitely. Yes, of course. Okay. Okay, great. So there are a few longer comments. I'll definitely hopefully get to these in the Q&A session. But I think in general, the feedback is that it would be helpful. A few times, great. Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's look at my next activity. That was just the first one. My next one is stop, start, continue. This really helped me. As I mentioned, I was a young teacher living in New Zealand, and I was struggling with the class. I felt like they were bored with all of the activities that I was doing. And a teacher recommended I do this kind of an activity. You can do it say once a week. You could do it halfway through the course. It's very quick and easy. It's not necessarily that you can take all of their comments and actions on board. For example, they don't want to do homework, or they don't want to do mini vocab tests. But it's really nice for you to explain that perhaps there's things they would like to start doing in class, things they would like to stop doing, and then things they would like to continue doing. For example, they're really enjoying the games and the quizzes. They really enjoy the pronunciation games. They would like to do presentations, or they'd like to start a movie or a book club. You'd be really surprised by what some of the students give back to you. You will always get a student that says no, nothing, or just no comment. But students that you find that will really want to engage with you might write something really insightful, something that you haven't thought of. So I really encourage you to use this kind of activity. It's really helpful. And the last one is active listening. So this is a lot easier for higher levels. It would be very challenging in a beginner or perhaps even an elementary class, but it's definitely something that I think would work, and let me show you why. It's also a good skill to have, not just as an English language classroom. So be fully present. So you've got an activity, a nice one to do with, say, the IELTS task part 2 of the speaking test, or you give a student a guide, a little prompt. They need to prepare a little speech about themselves. Say it's only 1 to 2 minutes long. For example, tell me about a favorite memory, or what is a great birthday party that you've had in the past. You can tailor it to what the target language is that you want the students to be using to. And this is what you're going to teach the students, and how to be a more active listener. So the first part is, you are now going to listen to your friend. He's going to give you a little presentation. Make sure you have no cell phones. Close your books. Make sure that the person listening is fully present. They're not quickly doing some homework that they should have done, or chatting to someone else. They must be fully present for the activity. Prep them with a question. So once the person has finished their activity, they will say, what was your favorite thing about that? Could you tell me a little bit more about this? Get them to ask a second question. So you could say, what was your favorite part about your birthday? Why is this your favorite memory? Prompt them with a second question. Try to get the student to put themselves in the other person's shoes. So a question like, how did that make you feel? That's a great one. Validate their thoughts and feelings. My favorite sentence for this is, I hear you. So when someone is saying something, they are perhaps opening up a little bit, you say something like, I hear you, and that makes the other person feel validated and seen. And then, which I think is a great task, is get them to repeat back what they've heard. So they've listened to this little mini speech their partner has said. Now they have to give back a little summary of what their partner has said. And that's a great way to see if the listening has actually taken place. It's a much more engaging conversation, an engaging activity, rather than just asking and answering each other 10 questions using the past continuous, for example. There are further reading and activities about active listening in particular in the post-webinar handout. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. We're going to open it up to any Q&As. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining us again.
Hi, thank you so much, Amy. There were so many activities there that the comments are flooding in.
Okay.
I really enjoyed that. I'm going to read a lovely comment from Fiona Rodrigo. She says, you seem to be a very sensitive person. It's ideal for teachers. That sensitivity is beautiful. So there's a comment that I think is really important for the multicultural classroom, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Fiona. That's a wonderful comment. Thank you.
It is, and Marjana says there were so many ideas, and yeah, there definitely was. Um, I think one of the popular activities was start, stop,
Stop,
continue in
continue.
that
That's right.
order,
That's right.
right? Um, and a question that comes kind of into my mind is, what age groups do you think that would work with?
That's a
Have
great
you had
question.
different experiences?
I have, you know, I think that it can work. I know with teachers that teach younger learners or even children, I do think it can work.
Mhm.
Even if they write something simple, if they're only able to write a few words, they can still think of
Mhm.
something that they would like to start, stop,
Yeah.
and continue for sure.
Yeah. And do you ask them to do it in English, or do they do it in their L1? Yeah,
So
how do you set it up?
that's a really great question. Thanks. So definitely get them to do it in English. That would be great.
Mhm.
I've never actually used or let students write, for example, in their L1 in my experience, because I was teaching students from all over the world. And
Mm.
it was also great to get them to use a bit of English, even if they are beginners or elementary students and they're struggling.
Mhm.
Um, and it's definitely an individual activity. And
Mhm.
the students can take, you give them, say, 5 minutes, even if it's at the end of the day. You could even do it as they walk into the class. We've got a little quick activity to start off with.
Mhm.
This is what we can look at, and then you just collect it. And it's also important,
Mhm.
I think, not to read it there. Just take them and make sure that they feel like it's an anonymous activity. You're not going
Yeah.
to pick students out for their comments or for their feedback. You take
Mhm.
them, you put them in your bag, and you read them at break time, perhaps.
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, that's it's for students, and then it kind of goes into your planning and what you're going to do next. Yeah, that
Absolutely.
seems to make a
Absolutely.
lot of sense. We've got lots of comments and
Mm-hmm.
questions coming in now. So
Great.
let's let's take a look. I have I'm looking at one which is
Okay.
interesting. Um from Raju Lingala. And Raju says, my students are bilingual.
Mm,
They're always talking in their native language, Telugu, and not in
yes.
English. So maybe Raju's got a a group that mostly all speaks the same language. Any
Yeah.
tips for helping them use more English?
Absolutely.
Big
Absolutely. So
question.
no, it's a great one, and I do have something that I hope can definitely help. Um,
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean it can be for adults or for younger learners. You think of something, I've used chickpeas or beans, just some raw
Hmm.
ones they act as like tokens, for example.
Hmm.
And each student at the beginning of the course, say, has 10 tokens. And each time you make it an award system, and each time you hear someone speaking in their L1, you take away a chickpea. Or
Hmm.
if homework is done well and completed well, you give them one. So it kind of works as a rewards-based system. And even though I've used this a lot, even though the students are adults potentially, they start to take it very seriously, because at the end of the course, you give an award for the person who has the most number of counters, whether it's beans or chickpeas or um, I don't know, stars, something that you've got. And that
Hmm.
really helps encourage them. It also helps the students hold each other accountable as well. And if they hear, sometimes what will happen is the students start speaking their L1, they'll say, teacher, he or she is not speaking English, take away a chickpea. And then you become like this
Competitive.
enforcer. It's competitive, and you're not the only
Yeah.
one enforcing, please speak English, please speak English, because you sound like a broken record after a while. So it's nice
Hmm.
to let the students hold each other accountable to that. That's one way I think that it could definitely help.
Yeah, that's a really nice technique. And I like that it's like things that you can touch. It makes it
Yes, it
tangible.
makes it
That's great.
tangible. It's not just like stickers on a wall with stars and
Uh-huh.
merits. And then every day, you know, you you could have a little bag, you collect their chickpeas so they don't go home and add to it by themselves. So you keep a tight control over the amount of rewards that they have.
I love that. Yeah, everyone needs motivations. I mean, I've done something like that in secondary classes.
Okay.
Actually, my own French teacher did something like that with us, because in our multilingual French class, there were a bunch of Ukrainian
Yes.
students. There were me and
Yes.
some other English-speaking students, some Spanish
Yeah.
students. And we worked together because it was sometimes easy, but actually it was quite good when she said, like, let's do some points, let's try to say, right, try not to speak
Yes.
English, and
I
I
know.
like that. I like the motivation. I did.
Yeah. And I
Uh-huh.
get it. It is so tempting. If you're there to learn English, but your friend speaks the same L1 as you, and you're even from the same country, it's so tempting just to revert to speaking. It's not like you're in a class with someone from Brazil, and you can't speak Portuguese and they can't speak French, and you have to communicate in English. It's more challenging when you all have the same L1. It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, just taking that jump. And it's good when the teacher
It
says,
is.
okay, make pairs with someone from a different language. I think that
Yeah,
really
it
helps
helps.
everyone.
Yeah.
um let's see if there's any other questions that are interesting. Well, there's one which is, we started talking about already. It's from Maria
Yes.
de Lourdes Martinez Ruiz. And she says, what's the role of the L1 in multicultural classrooms, and how can I take advantage of it? So yeah, do you have any kind of tips of where it's kind of good to let the students use
Yeah.
L1 in kind of reading or speaking or
Yeah,
planning?
I mean that's a really good question. I think that the only instance where I have where that's been helpful is when a student, for example, gives a presentation or a talk, not in their L1, but still talking about their culture or their language or their food. But where their L1 comes in, that's a challenging one, because sometimes it's really helpful, say in a class where lots of students have Latin languages like French, Spanish, Portuguese, and you can have a lot of students trying to figure out words based on, because it's fairly similar to their
Yeah.
L1. And it's helpful sometimes, unless you get false friends, which does happen a lot as well. But it's a really good question. I think that it would depend on the context, and perhaps, for example, with younger learners, I think you might have to use it or lean towards it a little bit more, because with young learners, they don't have that, especially with things like discipline or focus. If they don't understand English and you're asking them to do something, that's a challenge, because they're not going to listen. So you might have to revert to the L1 sometimes as well.
Yeah, yeah. Like I an idea that I thought of, that when you mentioned presentations, is that yeah, presentations are tricky, because when you research something, you find really complicated language
Yeah,
online.
that's true. That's
So
true.
researching in a first language, and
Oh,
then
that's hard.
obviously like planning the
Yeah,
presentation in
yeah.
English,
Yeah.
that's something that I've tried, because sometimes the research stage is when students get lost and a bit like frustrated because they can't
Yes,
understand the English
absolutely.
web pages. Yeah, that's something that could work.
Yeah, it would definitely
um
be, sorry, up to you.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that those student presentations are definitely geared to more higher level students, I would say, into upper int and above. I don't know if it would work unless you'd have to give them a lot of scaffolding. I use the example of speak about a food from your home country, or speak about an important holiday, because then that's really simple. But if you're giving them a more open-ended topic, it absolutely is hard to research even something that's from your country and then perhaps translate it. That's not necessarily learning English, that's just translating. So it's definitely
Yeah.
for more higher level students, sure.
Those are nice topics. Food from your country, festival
Yeah,
from your country.
festival, and people love talking about their own countries and where they're from, and it's a much easier topic to engage with.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be in a multicultural class, and even as a student to hear presentations from all around the world
Yeah,
must be
yeah.
great.
And as a teacher,
Uh-huh.
I've learned so much listening to
hmm
presentations from students, because you don't know everything from all the different cultures that you teach. So it's
hmm
wonderful for you to learn something too.
Let's go to and a question that I saw earlier, and it's about the code of conduct activity that you
Mm,
did.
mm.
Um, and I think the person said in the chat, how do you set that activity up? What can you kind of say a bit more about how you
Yes,
organize and how you start that activity? Sounds like a
sure,
good one.
sure. Is this the code of conduct activity? Um,
hmm
okay. So it's not so much of an activity, but it's more of an understanding when the students sign up to your classes, that they have a code of conduct, a set of rules. Say you have to attend 80% of the course in order to get a certificate. You must write
hmm
all of the tests in order to pass the course. And then you can add there, I acknowledge, or I promise not to use conversations regarding religion and politics in the classroom.
hmm
So you can definitely make it an activity and discuss, for example, what kinds of things would be acceptable, what kinds of things would not be.
hmm
It definitely opens up discussion, but I think it's the best way to have an awareness that we all need to respect each other in the classroom. And
hmm
speaking about religion and politics, it opens up a can of worms, because it could potentially be that someone would get offended.
Yeah.
So by having it in the code of conduct and everyone agreeing to the same code of conduct and holding us
hmm
all accountable to these rules, so yeah, you can definitely make it into an activity, and especially explain it to students who don't perhaps understand what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah, because students in a multicultural class, I guess they're learning what things
Exactly.
that they
What's
can't bring
okay?
up. They,
Yeah,
yeah, they might not, they might be in a class for the first time with someone from a different
yeah,
religion. So yeah, I think
yeah,
that's really important. It sounds like
yeah,
a
sure.
great plan to have it from the start.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think we're going to have to start wrapping up now, Amy. We've got lots and lots of thank yous coming in.
Wonderful.
Lasha
Thank
says,
you.
thank you for this interesting webinar. Lots of activities. Samira says we want more. So that's great. Well, there are more webinars today. We're going to have a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back to talk about linguistic diversity in pronunciation, a different topic
Wonderful.
with
So
our
interesting.
presenter Victor in Brazil. So thanks for coming, Amy. Um,
Thanks for having
uh,
me.
it's been great, and we hope to see you again sometime.
Absolutely.
Everyone have a great break, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.